announcing historic investment in America's railroads.
It's a very unfair situation. This is really election interference. That's all it is. This trial is ridiculous.
So I just think it's really important that Virginians have a clear choice. No limits or reasonable limits. That's the bill that I will sign. That's the one that our Speaker of the House is committed to make sure comes to my desk.
And I think Kim Reynolds has given the hat tonight to Ron DeSantis, saying that this is a two-man race. It's time to pick a winner for once in this race.
Hello, I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington, D.C. Welcome to America Decides. Well, a CBS News poll finds former President Donald Trump holds a commanding lead over his GOP rivals in the 2024 race. 61% of likely Republican primary voters said they would vote for the GOP frontrunner today. That puts him far ahead of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is 43 points behind at 18%. Finn Gomez and Anthony Salvanto join us now to discuss. Finn is CBS News political director. Anthony is CBS News executive director of elections and surveys. He conducted this poll. So, Anthony, let's start with you. What are we learning about former President Trump's lead over the rest of the GOP field?
Hey there, Nancy. What we've learned is that the temperature outside has changed a little. The daylight's changed. But these numbers look a lot like August. It's been pretty steady for Donald Trump, a big, wide lead. You know, there's a little bit of movement down in the second tier of candidates, if you will. You have Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy swap places a little bit, but we're still talking about single digits there for them. And there's something that stood out for me I want to show everybody. When we ask people, okay, are you paying attention to this race? We're getting closer to Iowa, closer to New Hampshire, right? You might expect that to be big. Well, no, it's just a third of GOP primary voters who say they're following this race very closely. I think that raises the political question. If you are trailing Donald Trump, how do you break through when not a lot of folks are paying attention to this? Maybe because Trump has such a wide lead, Nancy.
Interesting. One group we know is paying very close attention is the Trump campaign. Finn, what are they saying about not just polls like this that show them far ahead among their Republican rivals, but also these new polls that came out this weekend showing him beating President Biden, even in battleground states?
They told me that, you know, despite some of these legal hurdles that they're experiencing, obviously Donald Trump is back in court today in Manhattan. Their campaign's focus on some core issues: inflation, crime, immigration, and war. They're essentially their position on their anti-war almost position, if you will, essentially saying by focusing on those issues, they have gained not only in the primary battle here, but also overall in a hypothetical matchup, as we saw both in Anthony's poll and also in the New York Times Siena poll, we saw the battleground lead that he currently holds versus President Biden.
Interesting that they think that this is an issue-based lead, especially as that we see the former president day after day in courtrooms, not necessarily talking about those issues. Anthony, let me ask you about the GOP candidates who have dropped out. Has that changed or scrambled this field in any way? Does it mean anything for the remaining candidates?
So two things. One is you want to understand Donald Trump has something of a floor. There's just over a quarter of voters, and this has been rather consistent, who are saying they're only considering him. And a crowded field, that could put a good floor under him that gives him a huge advantage. There's another half that are considering Donald Trump and some other candidates. And so, okay, as other candidates, maybe some others drop out, when you ask voters to rank things, Donald Trump could still pick up some votes from consideration. And it's not clear who benefits, but I will say this, he's still the central focus of this. When you ask people, okay, what will help you finally decide? The top answer is seeing what happens with Donald Trump. So he's still the center of attention, even for people who are still a little bit on the fence, and watching the debates comes in second to that, Nancy.
So this old idea that perhaps if some candidates were to drop out of the race, it would consolidate support against a second-tier candidate, you're saying actually some of those votes may very well just go directly to Donald Trump.
Yes, some of them would go to Donald Trump because he's being considered by some people who aren't voting for him. Ron DeSantis could stand to gain a little bit in that consolidation based on our polling, but not nearly enough to really be anywhere close to Trump. And then Nikki Haley, who's currently, as you say, she's currently gained a little bit, but she hasn't been able to convert that slightly larger number of people who are considering her into actual first vote choice. All that's been holding in place, Nancy.
And Finn, another poll that got a lot of attention this weekend was this New York Times poll that found that in 5 of 6 battleground states that President Biden won back in 2020, he's now trailing by 4 points, 5 points, even 10 points in Nevada. How's the Biden campaign reacting to that?
No, I just spoke to a senior Biden campaign official who told me that essentially that overall their message in reaction to these polls is essentially that everyone should, quote, calm down. It's still a year away until Election Day 2024. And they believe that people, essentially voters, haven't really been paying attention. They haven't really been engaged in the primary battle and in the current status of the race right now. However, with time, with more messaging, they said that the millions that they've spent right now in messaging on ads, Nancy, what's only going to increase. They're calling it a drop in the bucket. So they think that this will also ignite some of those folks who haven't been paying attention, some of their supporters that haven't been paying attention, to be more focused and realize that that the trajectory of these polls, that possibility could essentially cause them just to be more involved.
If there's one thing Anthony always reminds us, it's that polls, especially polls a year out, do not necessarily predict what's going to happen on Election Day. But Anthony, one thing the Biden campaign argues is more predictive are elections like the ones that are taking place tomorrow across the country in states like Ohio, Virginia. They say those are much better predictors of what's going to happen 1 year from now. What are you going to be watching for tomorrow?
Well, tomorrow the focus is on the abortion issue. Now, we know from the midterms in 22 that was motivating for Democrats. We know from current polls that's motivating for Democrats. So you've got a state like Ohio that's been trending Republican. Donald Trump won it fairly easily. But we've seen in some red Republican states where once the abortion issue goes to the voters, the pro-abortion rights side has actually done a little better than that and in fact has prevailed. In a referendum, I'm going to be watching the vote patterns compared to the referendum that they held back in August, where some said that was sort of a proxy for what's going to happen. Well, that was where the pro-abortion rights side prevailed. So that's a way to start to gauge just how much abortion might affect some Republican swing or turnout, motivation. Like Finn said, that's going to be really important for Democrats because right now they're trailing Republicans in motivation, Nancy.
So is that what you're watching for as well tomorrow, Finn, is whether this abortion issue has retained its potency in races around the country? Absolutely,
Nancy, not just in Ohio, but you're seeing it's a core issue in the gubernatorial battles in Kentucky and Mississippi, the Virginia legislative elections. Abortion rights is a core issue. And, if there is any sort of blue gains here that we see tomorrow, I think it will be a result because of that issue and the galvanizing effect that it could still have amongst those base voters. If you looked at the New York Times Siena College poll, one of the most positive outcomes of that poll was the fact that President Biden actually still had a good amount of support in response to that issue.
Right, because that's been a chief motivator, perhaps the chief motivator for Democrats over the past year and a half or so. Finn Gomez, Anthony Salvanto, thank you both so much for being here. Appreciate it. Former President Trump took the stand in his New York civil fraud trial today. During his testimony, the GOP frontrunner lashed out repeatedly at the judge in the case and at the New York Attorney General Letitia James, who was listening on. At one point, Trump said, quote, "I'm sure the judge will rule against me because he always rules against me." Here's what the former president had to say after leaving the courtroom.
I think it went very well. I think you were there and you listened and you see what a scam this is. This is a case that should have never been brought. It's a case that should be dismissed immediately.
CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa joins us now. Robert, it was quite a day. Tell us a little bit about your experience just listening to what the former president had to say on the stand.
It's good to be with you, Nancy. Former President Trump took the stand today for a high-stakes appearance here in this court. He defended his Trump Organization's business practices over the decades, saying he did not inflate the value of his properties with any kind of misconduct or any kind of ill intent, though he did acknowledge that sometimes the properties were valued in different ways. He said sometimes they were undervalued in his view, sometimes they were overvalued, but he said he did nothing wrong. What was the big takeaway, though, watching this from inside of the courthouse, is that it was tense all day. Judge Arthur Engoron, who is overseeing this case, vented his frustration with Trump and his legal team at numerous instances, and by the day's end, Trump's lawyers were saying they would move for a mistrial in the coming weeks.
And what's at stake here, obviously, is it's a fraud case having to do with the way that the former president valued his properties in order to get loans. I want to play a little bit more, Robert, of what he had to say about the case outside the courtroom, and then we'll talk about it. Take a listen.
It's a very unfair situation. This is really election interference. That's all it is. This trial is ridiculous. The numbers are much greater than on the financial statement, and we've already proven that.
Robert, what are we seeing from the former president when he's not in the courtroom? Is he treating all of this as an opportunity to promote his 2024 campaign?
He is and he isn't. Today was pretty notable because former President Trump has often espoused his grievances to reporters in between different sessions here that he's been attending voluntarily over the past month or so. But at one point he came out and spoke to reporters and he zipped his lips because the judge made sure to say to him inside the courtroom, "Don't say anything during the course of your testimony today." So he was relatively muted at times, but then he did lash out during his testimony, even if he didn't just lash out on the outside as he has done in so many other instances.
Yeah, just reading the transcripts of the exchanges between the former president and the judge in this trial was so fascinating. You know, this is a man, a former president, who's not used to being told what to do. But in this case, the judge was telling him to answer the questions, to stop talking. He tried to get the president's lawyers at some points to get him back on track. And watching all of this is New York Attorney General Letitia James. She spoke outside the courthouse earlier today. Let's take a listen to what she said.
At the end of the day, the only thing that matters are the facts and the numbers. And numbers, my friends, don't lie.
Robert, what did she mean by that?
I spoke to the Attorney General, Letitia James, before she entered the courtroom, and she was smiling as she talked about the day ahead, and she repeated what she just said there to camera, that she believes at the end of the day, numbers and facts will tell the story. And let's be clear, Judge Arthur Engoron, before this trial even began, has already concluded that he believed Trump repeatedly committed fraud by inflating the values of his properties over the years. And now it's just a question of how much the penalty is going to be. And this trial could determine whether the lawsuit comes through and Trump has to pay $250 million as a penalty to the state of New York, because the state of New York and Letitia James, the AG, have said he overvalued his properties to the extent of $2 billion in their assessment.
Could have a big impact on the future of his businesses there in New York. Robert Costa, thanks for breaking it down for us.
Thanks, Nancy.
Tomorrow is Election Day, and it may be an odd year, but it's important, and there are seats and initiatives at stake in states all across the country. Next, we'll hear from Virginia Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin about his party's prospects in the state. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Tomorrow is Election Day in America, and it may not come with the pomp and circumstance you'd see in an even-numbered election year, but important statewide elections are being held across the country. CBS News campaign reporter Olivia Reynolds joins us from one of those states, Virginia. It's actually one of the most closely watched states this cycle. Olivia, welcome. You got a great interview today. You spoke with Virginia Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin aboard his bus about his party's top priority this election cycle. What did he have to say?
Hi, Nancy. Yeah, I had the opportunity earlier today to get on Youngkin's campaign bus and really talk to him about how he's feeling about the elections here tomorrow. He's trying to do something that has never been done before in the post-Roe versus Wade world, which is make abortion a winning argument for Republicans. And he's doing that by being very clear about how he feels about Virginia's 26 6-week abortion ban here in the state. He wants to change that, and he wants to make that a 15-week proposal. No abortions after that, except in cases of rape, incest, life of the mother, things of that sort. And I asked him how he feels that would play in this state that is typically a battleground. Take a listen here.
Well, just to be clear, I think that we wanted to first make sure that our position was one that everyone could understand. See, remember, just 4 years ago, the liberal left progressives who controlled the whole state put forth a bill, and they put it forth every year since, to extend abortion all the way up through and including birth, and paid for by taxpayer money. And no one can forget our former governor's comments. They'll keep a child comfortable while they decide whether the child lives or dies. And that was just so extreme and out of bounds for Virginians. And so as we entered this cycle, I had pulled together leadership and said, I think we should progress a bill that protects life at 15 weeks, where a baby can feel pain, with full exceptions in the case of rape and incest and when the mother's life is at risk. And this is a place that I think Virginians can come together on one of the most difficult topics in the Commonwealth and around the country. This is reasonable. And so we've done exactly that. And I just wanted to make sure people understand what we would deliver. And I am concerned by the fact that the other side, the Democratic candidates, have, I think, misled everyone on trying to address the position as something that it's not. It's not a ban. And the candidates that are all running have all agreed this is the bill that they would progress. And so I just think it's really important that Virginians have a clear choice. No limits or reasonable limits. That's the bill that I will sign. That's the one that our Speaker of the House is committed to make sure comes to my desk. And I think Virginians can count on that.
Tomorrow, if you win both chambers of the General Assembly, why not do 6 weeks? Why not go further?
Well, because this is where I think we can bring Virginians together. And I'm a man of my word. And this is what I told people we would do.
You see there, Governor Youngkin told me he's a man of his word. He said 15 weeks. He's staying with 15 weeks, even if it's a blowout election tomorrow and he wins both the Senate and the House of Delegates. He says that he will be sticking with that 15-week proposal. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays exactly in these suburban areas like Richmond, like Northern Virginia, and how women voters will really respond to that. Nancy?
Right, and that's exactly why political strategists from across the country are watching to see if his party can win control, once again, of the state legislature, because that's the only thing that would give him the ability to change that law. Olivia, you also asked the governor about the war in the Middle East. How did he address that conflict?
Yeah, you know, these will be the first elections held since that October 7th attack by Hamas in Israel, and it'll be notable to see how people are really responding to it. There's been a reckoning across the country of people protesting for a ceasefire, for, you know, a pause, a humanitarian pause, so that people can get in and kind of rescue these hospitals and people who are suffering there. I asked him, you know, does that play here? Does that play in Virginia? It's a smart electorate. These people care about issues going on abroad. So take a listen to what he had to say to that.
We've seen anti-Semitic threats go through the roof. And I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we're not going to stand for hate and violence in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have massive coordination now across law enforcement at the state level, the federal level, the local level, on campuses across Virginia. And I also believe it's a chance for us to recognize that the Muslim community is concerned here too. They have fears of backlash, and we want to make sure that all religious groups are protected and there is no room for hate in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Now, last week, Governor Youngkin signed an executive order preventing anti-Semitism in certain high schools and colleges and asking them to submit a plan and how they would deal with that issue. So he's taking strides to address anti-Semitism, but it's the Muslim backlash, the Palestinian backlash, that will be interesting to see how it plays out tomorrow in Election Day.
Really interesting interview with someone who a lot of GOP donors were hoping would jump into the Republican race for president himself. Olivia Rinaldi, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nancy.
We'll have team coverage of Election Day on a special hour-long edition of America Decides tomorrow, beginning at 5 p.m. Eastern. And at 8 p.m. Eastern, Norah O'Donnell will have all the latest election results. You can stream those right here on CBS News. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds is set to endorse Ron DeSantis for president. But does it matter to voters in the Hawkeye state? We'll hear from them next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The DeSantis campaign is betting big on Iowa, and tonight has the backing of the state's popular governor. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds is endorsing her Florida counterpart this evening at a rally in Des Moines. The move doesn't come out of nowhere. The pair have attended several events in the Hawkeye state together. CBS News political reporter Aaron Navarro has been following the DeSantis campaign and joins us now from Des Moines. Hi, Aaron. So DeSantis' numbers in Iowa, like the rest of the country, have stalled. Does his campaign think that this particular endorsement could be a game changer?
Nancy, thanks for having me. In short, yes. This is a campaign that has anchored itself in Iowa. They've embarked on what they call the full Grassley, a tour of all 99 counties here. They're about 83, I believe, or 87 on the way there. And they really believe that Reynolds will help them close the gap with Trump and also just shield off any of these other candidates in the race, including Nikki Haley. I talked to one Iowa state rep who was a former advisor in Reynolds' office, Taylor Collins, about this endorsement. Take a listen to what he had to tell me about the impact.
It's going to make a significant impact on this race. I mean, we're talking about a very popular governor here in Iowa. Iowans love Kim Reynolds. And if you look at the caucus scores, likely caucus scores, 90% of those Republicans are supportive of Kim Reynolds. So I think this is going to really shake up the race and really be a good night for Ron DeSantis.
Now, from talking to strategists on other campaigns, the question they had is they think it'll maybe be a little bit of a boost for DeSantis in Iowa, but will it be enough to kind of close this 20, at some points 30-point gap between himself and former President Trump?
And it is notable that any governor is endorsing someone other than Trump. It's something that governors have been reluctant to do throughout this cycle. Aaron, I know you spoke with Iowa voters this afternoon. What did they have to say about this?
So, in fact, a good amount of the voters I talked to in Des Moines were Democrats, but they didn't think that it would make an impact that much on this race. They are fully expecting for former President Trump to have the Republican nomination. Now, what was interesting when I talked to them about the 2024 race was what they said about President Biden. As you know, there's been a couple polls showing that his support for Democrats has eroded a bit. Take a listen to what they had to tell me about President Biden and his chances of beating Trump in a potential rematch.
I was hopeful maybe we weren't going to have to reapproach having Trump be in a highly elected office. I am going to watch the Republican debate on Wednesday, so curious to see what that ends up looking like.
If Mr. Trump becomes the nominee for the Republican Party, I will definitely vote for Mr. Biden.
Even though I would probably still vote for Biden, I would not do it very enthusiastically. And the Trump, and with all the indictments, with all the cases against him, I think makes it even more problematical.
Part of DeSantis' argument against Trump is that he will be more electable than Trump in the general election. But given the polls that we've seen showing Trump leading Biden marginally, I'm curious to see with voters in the coming months if that argument still resonates.
So interesting that those voters you spoke to seem to have completely jumped ahead of the GOP contest. They are already looking at what they assume will be the general election matchup. Aaron Navarro in Des Moines, thanks so much. And that does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. For now, you're streaming CBS News. See you later.